Flow is one of the engines of adult development. How do we become adults? How do we grow up? On the other side of flow states, we're more complex, we're more adaptable, we're wiser, we're more empathetic.
As in, like, it's an evolutionary kind of trait?
Flow is an evolutionary trait, and there are a bunch of different arguments about where it comes from. One of the most famous is that flow is a signal of mastery. When you have mastered a bunch of skills and they all come together in a new way, that's flow. Hey, I'm Stephen Kotler. I'm the executive director of the Flow Research Collective. Today on Ever Forward, we're going to be talking about flow states, peak performance aging, and how to rock till you drop.
Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to Ever Forward Radio. I'm so psyched to be here today with someone that I've been reading and listening to and watching for quite a while, because I really do feel like flow state and peak performance mesh so perfectly with what I talk about here on the show to live a life ever forward. You might have seen him on a TED Talk. You might have read one of his dozen-plus books. That's really one of the main things we're here to talk about today. His new one, NEUROBIOLOgy. And this one is going to be for you here and now, but maybe you in 10 years, maybe you in 20 years. But tune in, take note, because your future self is going to thank you. With that, Stephen, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Chase.
Before we kind of dive into NEUROBIOLOgy and really dial in the concepts of growing old and staying rad, which I love that phrase, the subtitle of the book, by the way, I would love if you could please kind of help us. Let's set the groundwork for some of your past work without going way down a rabbit hole and talking all things peak performance, all things flow state. But, more or less, we're here to kind of talk about an old dog and new tricks. What are some of the tricks we need to be aware of first when it comes to flow state and peak performance? What is some high level concepts and definitions to help the listener grab hold of?
Yeah, well, we got to start with flow, of course. So let's define flow for people. If you're not familiar with the term, runner's high, being in the zone. If you play basketball, it's being unconscious. If you're a jazz musician, you're in the pocket. The lingo is sort of endless. Flow is a technical term, a scientific term, but all the terminology, it means the same thing. It's a state of optimal performance where we feel our best, we perform our best. More specifically, it's any of those moments of rapt attention and total absorption. We get so focused on the task at hand, so focused on what we're doing, everything else just starts to disappear. Sense of self-consciousness, the inner critic, that nagging voice in your head.
Time dissipates.
Goes quiet. Yeah, as you pointed out, time dissipates. It'll most frequently just go so sucked into what you're doing that 5 hours will go by in 5 minutes. Occasionally, it'll slow down. You get a freeze frame effect. Many of you have been in a car crash, and throughout all aspects of performance, mental and physical, go through the roof. And the only other thing I think that's probably worth mentioning is my organization, the Flow Research Collective. What do we do? Who are we? What that sort of
You
stuff.
made a whole thing about it, yeah.
Right? Yeah, I made a whole thing about it. So at the Flow Research Collective, we're the world's leader actually in neuroscience-based peak performance research and training. So on the research side, we study the neurobiology of peak human performance, what's going on in the brain and the body when people are performing at their very best. And our central focus is flow, but there's obviously more to peak performance than just flow. So it's a little bit wider. And then we take what we learn and we use it to train people. And we train people in 130 different countries. We work with everybody from kind of professional athletes and members of the U.S. Special Forces to soccer moms, soccer dads, just average everyday folks, and all the way up to companies. So Facebook, Accenture, Audi, Bain Capital, the Air Force, the San Francisco Police Department, on and on and on. And the only reason I mention all this is we're data geeks. So we measure everything we possibly can. So what this means is we have wildly diverse, globally diverse, and deadly accurate tallies on what works and what doesn't. We're training tens of thousands of people every month. So big sample size, a lot of people, global, good ideas of what works for folks, what doesn't work for folks. And that's sort of it. And maybe the last thing that I'll say, because it'll help people orient it to me, my interest in research-wise has always been in the neurobiology. And the reason is this. Yes, you got to listen to me say big words every now and again, but the upside is if you go into the history of peak performance, flow science is actually old. It dates back to the 1870s. And we spent the 20th century decoding the psychology. And in the 1990s, Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, the godfather of flow psychology, and Susan Jackson, who was one of his graduate students, a sports psychologist, brilliant woman from Australia, got together. They wrote a book called Flow in Sports, which was literally about, hey, we took all these psychological ideas about flow and we're trying to train athletes. And if you read that book, you'll find out that like most of the time they weren't very good at getting people into flow. And it's not their fault. It's that psychology is a bad tool for it because psychology is super individual. Key things in peak performance, like where are you on the introversion to extroversion scale, right? Or what are your risk tolerances? That's totally individual, right? Some of it's genetic, some of it's set up by early childhood experience, but yours is very different from mine.
Right.
So one of the things that happens you see in peak performance, people will figure out what it works for me and they'll try to teach it to other people, and as a general rule, they fail. Like they may be able to teach it to other people, but other people, they try to apply it, it doesn't get them where they want to go. Why? Because it was super individual. It was sort of customized for you.
Yeah.
Neurobiology, you go one level down, that's shaped by evolution. It's shared by all humans. So why does our stuff work in 130 countries? Why is it reliable and repeatable? It's because we've taken it a level down to the neurobiology, which is shared. So that, and I'm going to punch out the mic stand.
That's part of flow state.
Part of flow state. I get so
Introduce
excited I punch out the mic
micro
stand.
chaos everywhere.
So yeah, those are, I think is from, I mean, I'm happy to go anyplace else, but I think like from a place to start, you want to know some stuff about me that sort of sets the table.
Perfect.
That'll tell you.
Yeah, and what I love about that interpretation, thank you, is that it reminds me of this other concept that has kind of been the through line for me in my life now, getting into my late 30s, but also, 6 years of doing this show and having a variety of people on about physical fitness, nutrition, optimization, entrepreneurship, relationships, all the ways in which I feel are important. And I say, help us live a life ever forward. The same through line I'm hearing is that basically at the end of the day, like kind of everything works because at the end of the day, we're all humans. We all have very, very similar, if not the same at some level, biology. We can always count on a human being human at some base level. So if we can understand that, apply it to whatever our thing is, whatever the application might be, that's really, kind of jumping to the finish line, I think, a little bit, or at least just giving yourself a little bit of leg up, no matter what.
No, I
the
agree.
application
And in
is.
fact, as you were talking, and I don't know if this is true, so I'm just going to make a statement, but I think if you were to look at most of the stuff that we're actually doing at the collective, I don't even know if it's human, it's mammalian. You know what I mean? Like when I say stuff is old,
Interesting.
so animals can get into flow.
So we're talking kingdom now, not just.
Yeah, I've moved.
All right,
Yeah, exactly.
all right.
Well done.
Okay, all right.
So dogs can get into flow. I wrote about that in my book, Small Furry Prayer. People get into flow with horses. There's cross-species flow. So the state, most
And
all
like an
social,
avatar too, we have to just take our braid and connect it to the horse, right? That's how we get into flow state.
That's exactly right. It's,
I knew it.
Elon.
I knew it.
It's so
I
good
knew
to
it.
see you again.
I knew it. If it were that easy, I feel like a lot of people would. I'd probably try that out. I don't know. If there's like some kind of if you could literally have a human.
I saw Existence. I'm a Cronenberg fan. I'm in. Sign me up.
I don't know. I digress.
I don't know about the scene in the
digress.
Chinese restaurant. I want to kill the waiter. If we can do it out, me having to kill the waiter, I'm in. If I got to kill the waiter, I got to think about it.
I'm not trying to kill anybody. That's for damn sure.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, but yeah. Sorry. There is
That's all right.
definitely this animal kingdom, human, and any kind of other mammal. I think connection that if we just think about for a second, we've all probably been there, or can at least witness in in the zoo or in horse therapy, at least for sure.
Yeah, equine therapy is a really great example of cross-species flow, right? It's sort of at the heart of that. When I talk about stuff that's old and evolutionary conserved, I'm sure there's a bunch of stuff I do that's uniquely human, but I think a lot of it is mammalian, which is sort of one of the reasons I think it works so effectively for so many people.
I didn't even pick up on that.
And we train
in the
squirrels,
basic concept. You train squirrels,
chipmunks,
That's nuts.
other mammals, other small mammals. We like small mammals.
I can't help myself. Just
Gophers are not. We can't train gophers. We were trying for a while, but they won't listen.
Are gophers mammals?
Gophers are mammals.
Interesting. Why? So okay. Well, then why do you think some mammals kind of crush it?
I was joking. You know I'm joking. You're taking me seriously. We don't train squirrels,
I'm
man,
like-
or gophers.
I
Come
believe
on.
it, dude. You live a rad life. You do a lot of cool
but
science.
we don't train. I would like to train squirrels because I like squirrels, but no, man, we don't do that.
Again, untapped market. Untapped market.
Untapped market.
Untapped market. Okay. All right. I'm gonna rein it in here a little bit, but I love the levels to which this can go. That's amazing. So at its core, when I was reading Country, and I think a lot of your new work now, I should say new application of a lot of your lifetime of work, is we're talking about you can't teach an old dog new tricks. And that you quite literally proved is kind of not the case. If we can have this baseline understanding of our biology, neurobiology. So I guess my first question in this case is, why park skiing? Why this level of physical and mental application and pushing the limits of both? Someone in their 50s, like, why was this the thing?
So I've always been an action sport athlete, skier, surfer, and et cetera. And whatever action sport I happened to be doing at the time, that's always my laboratory, where ideas, I'll take something into the mountains or the ocean or whatever, see if it works for me, see if it works for friends of mine. If it does, I'll say, okay, maybe there's something here, or maybe this is personal and psychological, but like now let's run greater experiments.
So you kind of go real world. See what's out there.
Yeah,
and then
I go always real world first.
Interesting.
And then, it's very backwards from how
I appreciate that approach.
Yeah, how most science is done. Most science sort of starts with the hypothesis and works forward. And that's just never been how I've done it. I've always sort of, here's the thing that happened. Why did it happen? How did it happen? How do I get more of it? How do I get less of it? Is this just me? Is this individual? Is this a psychology thing like we mentioned?
Can I duplicate this or not?
Or is this going to work for other people? Is it, and then you got to start asking, is it just men? Is it men and women? Like all those kinds of questions start to really matter.
Is it just gophers?
Is it just gophers? Because there's a lot that's just gophers. There's a Caddyshack joke here that I can't get to, but it's there.
Just a Baby Ruth. Just a Baby Ruth. Yeah. I'm tanking my own show. But
That's all right. Please keep going.
Your banter is appreciated here. We kind of already talked about this. I was going to bring up, the aspect, defining flow state a lot is, you talk about challenge skills. Balance is flow's most important trigger, and how flow follows focus. Were you aware when you're stepping into your skis and onto the mountain doing all these things, were you really top of mind aware of these concepts? And was that driving your experience? Were you like, okay, flow follows focus, so let me tap in, let me focus so that I can really
but
get
the other one, you have to let me put some context around what I did in the experiment, and then we'll actually go back because you were talking about the challenge skills balance. And that's the answer to the question that you're asking. So I chose park skiing because the general feeling of park skiing is if you haven't learned by the time you're 30, 35, it's going to be really difficult. At 40, 45, that's impossible. And by the time you're 50, or I started when I was 53, you're crazy. That's the standard answer.
Kind of like death wish kind of thing.
Yeah, there are 11 or 12, depending on how you're counting them, different biological reasons why supposedly learning to park ski at that age is completely impossible. And there's a bunch of stuff in my field, flow science, and a couple of the related fields that said, no, this is not true. And old dogs can absolutely learn new tricks, and they'll be better at learning new tricks than younger dogs even. But how you train people differs. And where it differs the most is with the challenge skills sweet spot. So let me back it up and put a context around it, and then we'll walk through it. Flow states have triggers, preconditions that lead to more flow, as you mentioned. Flow follows focus, as you also mentioned. So that's what all the triggers do. They drive attention into the present moment. There are 26 known triggers. There are probably way more, but that's what we've discovered, science has discovered so far. And
26 known triggers
for flow.
For flow, okay.
Yeah, there are 12 or 13, depending on who you're counting, on the individual side. And then there's a collective version of a flow state. So it could be this group flow or interpersonal flow. Me and you talking. Okay. We get so sucked in the conversation, a couple hours go by. Yeah. That's interpersonal flow. Group flow, fourth quarter comeback in basketball or football, right? Or a band coming together and like they're really jamming.
Like every contributing factor person
is working.
Is reliant,
right? It's group flow or team flow is literally defined as a team performing at their best. Okay. Like optimal team performance. And then you can go to scale. Communitas is flow at scale. So if you go to a rock concert and you get everybody sort of like merges with the band and we're all clapping and singing, right? That's communitas, it's flow at scale. So there are 13, 14, 15 triggers for group flow and 12 for individual flow that have been discovered. They all do work the same way. They all work by driving attention in the present moment. Neurobiologically, they're doing some different things, but that's what's really happening. They're driving attention in the now. The most important is what you mentioned. It's the challenge skills balance. So the idea is I pay the most attention to the task at hand when the challenge of the task slightly exceeds my skill set. So you want to stretch, but not snap. So there's a bunch of things that are sort of important here. One, on the other side of flow state, we are more complex. We're more adaptable because you're pushing on your skills. So you're learning. It's sort of built in, right? We're more complex. We're more adaptable. We actually, wisdom accrues, expertise accrues and flows. For these reasons, a lot of people, including Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, the godfather of flow psychology, has argued that actually flow is one of the engines of adult development. How do we become adults? How do we grow up? On the other side of flow states, we're more complex, we're more adaptable, we're wiser, we're more empathetic.
As in, like, it's an evolutionary kind of trait?
Flow is an evolutionary trait, and the argument there are a bunch of different arguments about where it comes from. One of the most famous is that flow is a signal of mastery. When you have mastered a bunch of skills and they all come together in a new way, that's flow. And that really matters from a peak performance aging perspective. We'll talk about that.
Really interesting, yeah.
Yeah. But so the thing that we realized is this. So in normal folks, that challenge skills sweet spot, the difference between challenge and skills is roughly, this is a metaphor, this isn't science, but metaphorically about 5%. So we have the best chance of dropping to flow when the challenge of the task is about 5% greater than the skills we're bringing to it. So 5%.
Is that a lot? That doesn't seem like a lot.
No, it's not a lot.
Yeah.
In fact, now, if you are shy, if you are timid, if you're risk averse, you're outside your comfort zone. Not a lot, but just outside your comfort zone. The opposite for, like, when I work with entrepreneurs or type A types, hard chargers, they're going to check challenges that are 20, 30, 40% greater than their skills simply because it wakes them up, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's really key, actually. So we know from the science of motivation, I talk about this in Art of Impossible, properly set high hard goal will boost motivation by 11 to 25%. So it's important. You want those high hard goals. You just need to chunk it down so that what's in front of you is about 5%. So the thing you're doing right here, right now, it fits in that sweet spot. But the overall goal can be that big, right? Just what you're doing right here, right now. Now, what changed, what we started to realize is, we're going to talk about peak performance aging, but let's be clear on a couple things. Aging is a fact of life. Old is a mindset. And old is a mindset that sets up early.
That's a note. We're getting there. We're getting there. I love
right.
it.
And it's a mindset that sets up early. So the minute the voice in your head starts saying things like, you're too old for this shit, and for a lot of us, that's in our 20s, right? Now you're and huge impact on performance, on vitality, on longevity, on health, like really, really a big issue. Once that mindset starts setting up, for sure, that challenge skills sweet spot starts to shrink, and it shrinks also because of what's known as allostatic load. Allostatic load is literally the impact of stress over time, right, on our psychology and our physiology. And we realized at the Flow Research Collective that once you get people past a certain age, and really in a lot of cases it's early 30s, that sweet spot has shrunk from like 5% down to about 1%. So at the core of the NAR country approach, go slow to go fast, go 1 inch at a time, right? So when I was learning how to park ski,
slow is smooth, smooth is fast.
Yeah, if you want to use the special spec ops phrase. So we were like, we're going to start with established motor patterns, something you can do 100% time with zero fear, no constant interference, and build on top of that very, very, very slowly. And it ended up working because flow massively amplifies progression. One of the things that happens in the state is learning goes through the roof, right? And studies run by the U.S. military, soldiers in flow learn 240 to 500% faster than normal. So huge boost in learning. So you end up going slow to go fast, right?
That's why we do so many, live fire training exercises and, real world training exercises outside of just like, hey, here's your weapon, here's a tactic, here's a maneuver. Compartmentalize, figure it out in your brain. No, they're like, okay, here, go do the shit. That's how you're not going to get in flow state in a classroom. You got to be out in the field.
So that's the challenge skills balance really has a huge role wherever you are in your life for peak performance, and changes a little bit over time. And depending on what your psychology is like, it can start shrinking in your 20s and your 30s, and definitely by your 40s and 50s. So it changes the way you approach flow. And this is one of the key points. Like our ability to get into flow is crucial for peak performance, crucial for peak performance aging, but it diminishes over time. So you have to train it a little bit, like most of the other skills I talk about in our country. So I'll stop there.
Yeah.
I'll let you ask
No,
your
that's
next
fascinating.
question.
And like I said, you're kind of getting to a point I definitely want to cover. Is this sense of still being a radical person and pushing your limits and getting deeper into different flow states? Is it more mental? Is it physical? Is it all in our mind? Is it really just an age-related thing? But before I do, I want to go back to that 5% aspect. That's really intriguing for me. It's intriguing for me to kind of like wrap my head around, how do I actually quantify? How do we quantify? Okay, I'm going to push myself 5%. What does 5% really look like?
It's for most of us, it looks like going slower than you're used to going. It is actually like that's in my experience, it's a little under.
Actually letting off the gas pedal.
Yeah, for me, it's about letting off the gas pedal, but for a lot of us, it works well because our expectations for ourselves are so extreme that letting off the gas pedal is actually
We're still tied to expectations, not the work in front of us.
Is useful here. So it's really hard to measure, and that's why I said this is not science. The original idea came from Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, the godfather of flow psychology, sat down with a Google mathematician, and they worked it out. I heard about it from Csikszentmihalyi, and he wasn't serious about it. He was just like, this is just a guess. We took it and tried to run experiments on it, and we started downhill mountain biking. The track is set, so the height, the jumps, they're this height, right? They're this distance. Like you could measure everything, and you could grade it that way. And that wasn't a real experiment. It was a summer-long
Well, that is just math, at certain rate, certain weight, this angle of the jump.
But it varies a little bit. But here was the cool thing we noticed. So most people hear that and go, "Oh wow, I'm going to end up going slower." It is true, but you know what didn't happen? Nobody plateaued when they stayed in that that sweet challenge skills sweet spot. That's what it. Yes, they were progressing a little slower than normal, but there's no flat line. So in skiing and mountain biking, in these seasonal action sports, what you tend to see is people make a lot of progress at the front end of the season,
right? Yeah,
and then at the back end of the season, right? And they flatline for a lot of the middle. What we saw with this, and it's not written in stone, but I have used it a lot, and I've seen this repeatedly, is that you don't plateau. So you're going slower than you want to go.
Sounds amazing.
But in the end, you're right. I mean, you're not plateauing, which is really a huge deal. If you can keep progressing every time you come back, that's something special.
I appreciate that answer because it kind of is, for me at least, easier to kind of wrap my head around, okay, how do I quantify doing 5% more, pushing myself 5% beyond my known capabilities versus just kind of, okay, I can let off a little bit.
And there's certain places where like weightlifting, there is like what the hell does that mean? I certainly can't add 5. I mean, every time I go back to the gym, I can go 5% harder. Are you kidding? My bench would be 500 by
Progressive
now, right?
overload does reach a point of diminishing return. Absolutely, yeah.
I can't. I'm tapped out, and I can stay tapped out for a while, right?
Truly.
There are certain situations where like it doesn't even make sense that way, which is why I said again, it's a metaphor. It's a way of thinking about these things much more. But to me, it's the most useful metaphor I've encountered. That's a flamethrower, right? This thing that I'm looking at over there.
That's from Ghostbusters.
Oh, it's from Ghostbusters. Okay, it looks like a flamethrower.
Like independent film they were doing here. Yeah. So, I mean, with the right alterations.
I just appreciate that at any moment we can go commit arson.
So how do we get into flow state with a flamethrower? That's what I want to know next.
Stick around. You've clearly never partied with the motocross guys. They love fire.
Not yet.
They love fire.
I'm a pyro at heart too, so I don't know why I haven't tried that yet. But
This is not going how you want it, is it?
No, this is going exactly how
good.
it needs to go. And again, to kind of go back a little bit to the biology aspect, I got some notes. I just want to make sure I hit some points here. You, in the book, this is a direct quote from your work, getting our biology to work for us rather than against us, you say. So let's talk our aging biology. Most of us are going to be old. There's no getting around that, for a lot longer than our ancestors, and quite possibly a lot longer than we ever expected. I think we all can agree that, we're aging, well, any listener to this show, I'll say, we're aging better, more resilient, and living longer and higher quality of lives. So research shows we can sustain peak performance further into life than anyone thought possible. Over the course of later decades, there are fundamental shifts in how the brain processes information. Our ego starts to go quiet and our perspective starts to widen. So how do you want to spend that time? I love that you brought up this concept of like ego as we're aging and kind of understanding, the biological implications there, and then also better understanding our perspective. How maybe right now, instead of waiting until we're in our 40s or 50s, how can we maybe, to tap into a better state of flow, let go of ego a little bit more and then, open up that perspective? Or is it a matter of biology?
Quote, high level, old idea around aging, traditional idea most of us sort of grew up with. It's what I like to call the long, slow rot theory. It's right. All of our mental skills, our physical skills, they decline over time. There's nothing we can do to stop the slide. The new theory, and that, by the way, was the dominant theory up to about 1995. And starting in 95, 96, holes started showing up in that research. By now, here we are, about 30 years later.
Holes being what? People are actually living a lot longer and higher quality?
Just contradictions in the data.
Okay,
that's not true. Oh, that's not true. I'll give you a couple of examples. What we now know is while our skills do decline over time, and they start young, they start in their 20s, right? For some of us, all of them are use it or lose it skills, including flow, right? I said our ability to flow matters over time, but our ability to get there declines over time. Almost everything is this way. So I'll give you a simple example, VO2 max, because VO2 max was one of everybody's favorite examples for like why peak performance aging was impossible. VO2 max upper range of aerobic capacity starts dropping around 25, really starts to fall off a cliff at 50. And they thought, well, there's nothing you can, right?
It's just age.
When they measure the VO2 max of 80-year-old octogenarian triathletes, they find on average they have the VO2 max of a healthy 35-year-old.
Oh, shit.
Yeah.
Wow.
So that was one. Strength is another example like this. But a lot of it is the cognitive function too. So that's the first half. That wasn't your question. The second half of your question is this. What happens as we enter our 40s and 50s in the ego quiets than what you were talking about is there are genetic shifts and there are shifts in how the brain works. In our late 40s is when they start to come on. And in our 50s, we gain access to three new levels of intelligence that are pretty much off limits before then, whole new levels of creativity, and not just creativity, but divergent thinking, which is outside the box thinking. The hardest aspect of creativity to train, and it becomes yours free of charge in your 50s. You gain way more empathy. So that's that ego starting to quiet, and way more wisdom. And wisdom is a very specific neurobiological trait. We know what it is. It's basically emotional intelligence writ large is one way to think of it. But you gain access to all this stuff in your 50s. So can you gain access to that stuff earlier? Not that stuff, because that's brain changes and genetic changes. But to answer your question, as we know, if you're trying to get your ego out of the way, mindfulness is your tool. That's really your tool. Different kinds of mindfulness for different situations, but like to calm the ego down a bit, that's really sort of one of the better tools. Just get a little bit of distance from yourself.
Or the book that did it for me was Ego is the Enemy, Ryan Holiday's
Ryan's
work
book
on ego.
Yeah.
That for me was probably the first, if maybe the second book in I'll call it, self-help, my journey to personal development, besides the physical aspect. I never thought I was an egotistical guy or a self-centered guy, but that book showed me I think every human being, the hidden ways that we are all actually very ego driven. And it just, it completely got my mind thinking about ego in my 20s still, which I'm very grateful for. But I do agree that I think most people in their 40s and 50s kind of say that same thing.
One of the things that's really, so I just told you what happens to your brain in your late 40s and your 50s. Not automatic. So this is interesting.
So it's not just like you hit an age milestone.
No, there are, with adult development, and this is what we're talking about essentially, there are moderators, is a psychological term. That's a fancy word for an if-then condition.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
So if you want these superpowers of aging, one of the things we said earlier is peak performance aging starts young, right? Mindset of old sits up early, so does peak performance aging starts young. If you want to just thrive throughout the course of your life, there's certain things you got to do by certain periods. By age 30, you really sort of need to solve the crisis of identity. You got to know who you are, what are your strengths, what are your beliefs, what are your virtues.
Who you are
right?
not.
Who are you not? Very good point. By 40, you sort of need what economists call match fit, or a tight link between who you are and what you do with most of your time. You need to live in such a way as to generate lots of passion, lots of purpose, flow. All this stuff really, really matters. And you usually need match fit to get at that. And that's one of the reasons you need identity by 30 is because you need this by 40. If you don't know who you are, then you don't know how to find, right? Then by 50, and this is where the ego stuff comes back and really bites people in the ass, and this is wild. By 50, we have to forgive ourselves and we have to forgive others who have done us wrong. So forgiveness starts to really matter. And the reason is all the superpowers that become ours, they all sort of come off these new kinds of intelligence that we get. All the intelligence is about multi-perspectival thinking. It's about being able to see things from other people's perspectives. If you're too egotistical, if you can't forgive others, then you're not going to be able to see things from other people's point of view.
Attunement.
Exactly. And so it'll block the intelligence, block the creativity, it blocks that empathy, and it blocks that wisdom. So you don't get any of this stuff if you can't really start to figure. And then there's more stuff to do in your 50s and 60s and 70s to hang on to that stuff. But I'll just stop there.
All right, so you were just talking about how these kind of mile markers in age, the human experience, if we are appropriately aware of the age that we're in, mentally, physically, biologically, there are certain kind of works to be done to set us up for the most amount of success possible in the next decade. What if we, I don't want to say like jump to the head of the line here, but a lot of this stuff, I think where we are now in the world, or at least in a lot of the conversations I'm having, I feel like we can begin to do a lot of that work sooner.
I mean, first of all, I don't think you want, first of all, if you're waiting to 30 to solve the crisis of identity, that's probably you can do it, and a lot of people do, but it can be problematic from a career. We start to figure out our careers in our 20s, and if you don't sort of know who you are, finding that career that's going to really work by 40. So I think there's a lot of advantages, and certainly when it comes to forgiveness of self and other, oh my God, especially because we know that's a really simple one. Loving kindness meditation, compassion meditation is 90%, this is, again, not science, metaphor, right? But 90% of the challenges we're going to face around forgiveness, it's the tool for the job, right? There's so much data. Richie Davidson's group at Madison has done a phenomenal job with the research on compassion meditation. We know all about it. If you've never done it, if meditation is even in your thing, it's so much easier because it's a script, right? All you're doing is running a script.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
So anybody can do it. In fact,
let me call upon this program in my operating system.
And like the good news about it, like I've gotten it, I'll do it. I'll run the script sometimes when I'm hiking my dog or driving my car. Like it's not like other kinds of meditation where you can't sort of do it you can do it and get maybe not 100% of the effect, but a good chunk of it. And it sort of does its work automatically. It impacts the way the temporal parietal junction, which is sort of the part of the brain that does perspective taking, physical perspective. Like when Like I'm sitting over here. If I move to the side of the room, your side of the room, I have a different physical perspective.
Right.
That does it there, and it does it emotional and psychological and intellectual perspective. So that's all. And it actually is the same part of your brain that goes haywire in out-of-body experiences, which is a crazy radical shift in perspective.
Been there a few
right?
times, yeah.
And usually it's in a life-threatening situation. It's your body trying to like shift perspective really quickly to save your ass. First time I ever had an out-of-body experience was the first time I jumped out of a plane and went skydiving. And I like jumped out of the plane and just floated right out of my body. And I'm looking back at my body and I'm like, I don't think this is it. This was like,
I got to get back there.
yeah, I mean, like this was long before I knew there was such a thing as out-of-body experience. Like none of this. I was like 17 years old growing up in Ohio. I had never heard of out-of-body experiences or anything like that. I was like, what the hell is
So
going
you're
on
experiencing
here?
something you didn't even know was a thing.
Is
so
a
it's
thing.
even
Yeah,
more
I had
trippy.
no idea. I had no
Wow.
idea.
Wow.
And for a long time, I wouldn't talk about it because,
Oh, yeah.
you know, an
It took
out-of-body
me 3 months to
experience.
talk about my first out-of-body experience.
Yeah, I mean, like you're all going to think I'm crazy or, you know what I mean? I'm going to end up in an mental institution.
I didn't even tell my wife. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was just like, how the fuck do I process what I just
I've
felt?
since done tons of work on it because out-of-body experiences are really common in flow. So this is one of the reasons I know this is the part of the brain that gets scrambled. I had to,
fascinating.
because it shows up in flow so much. But I mean, there's a Gallup survey that says 20% of the population has either had a near-death or an out-of-body experience. So it's a widely, experienced phenomenon, but a lot of people don't talk about it, obviously.
Damn. Another excerpt from your book here is getting our biology to work for us rather than against us. So let's talk our aging biology, which we kind of were just hitting on.
But let me give you a peak performance example, and then I'll give you an aging example, okay? Because this is just a definition of peak performance. Peak performance is getting our biology to work for us rather than against us. And it's not I coined those particular phrases, but like this is not a new idea. You go back to 100 years ago, William James was the godfather of psychology, wrote the first psychology textbook. In that textbook, it says the most important thing in any education is to make our nervous system our ally instead of our enemy. Nervous system meaning brain and body, right? So this is not a new idea.
There's a lot more of that right now. Yeah, shit.
Not a new idea. And we talked about flow triggers, right? I'll give you another flow trigger. Complete concentration is a flow trigger. We know flow follows focus, so obviously complete concentration is a flow trigger. So what does that mean biologically? Well, when I talk about complete concentration, one, if you want to concentrate, practice distraction management. This is getting our biology to work for us rather than against us. Why? Because we are not more powerful than our cell phones. Our cell phones are designed to resemble slot machines in how they work with our attention, right? The most distracting, addictive thing ever invented. We're not going to beat that. So practice distraction management ahead of time. When you want complete concentration for flow, turn off the cell phone, turn off email, turn off instant messages, turn all that stuff, right? Because we can't beat that. Give you a second example that's a little slightly different. How long should you focus for is a question I get asked. And
What's the sweet spot?
so this is interesting. The sweet spot is 90 to 120 minutes. Why?
It's more than I was expecting.
Yeah. Why is that? Well, we know, you have a REM sleep cycle that lasts 90 minutes to 120 minutes.
Wow, there it is.
We have an inverse. That's a sleep cycle. We have a waking focus cycle. That's the exact same length. So the brain, I always tell
matching
people,
a brainwave state.
exactly. When we train people, we look, start by starting. Flow is this massive studies run by McKinsey, the business consultancy. They wanted to know how more productive are executives in flow than out of flow. They spent 10 years doing this study. Average was 500% more productive in flow. So
500% more.
more productive.
Wow.
Yeah. It's huge. Flow is a step function worth of change.
Wow.
So this is the big deal with flow because this is biologically hardwired into all humans, all mammals we just talked about, or most mammals, right? So this everybody listening to this can get into flow and can use this. And this is a step function worth of change. And it's not learning 240 to 500% faster than normal. Creativity in studies we ran, Harvard, University of Sydney in Australia, 400 to 700% spike. Happiness, well-being, overall life satisfaction, they all spike. Empathy, wisdom, and these are huge spikes. This is optimal performance that comes built in. My point about the 500% more productive is people hear this and they're like, I don't have 90 minutes for complete concentration, right? Like, screw you, Steven. I want, right? One, you end up getting so much time back. Two, start by starting, right? Start by 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes. don't, but build, it's much easier to build up to 90 or 120 minutes because we have this we're getting our biology to work for us rather than against us. So that's just sort of an example there. How does this happen as we age? Here's a really simple example. So older adults who experience incredibly powerful emotions live longer and healthier lives than those who do not. And one of the reasons is when we experience very, very powerful positive emotions, we boost production of T cells, which fight disease, and then natural killer cells, which target tumors and other sick cells. So real peak performance aging message there.
Yeah, and this is what you talk a lot about in examples of when people most likely are in flow state and they don't maybe realize it. They're with other people and they're having these heightened emotional states.
How do you want to?
So it's like
sense of control.
If you're trying to get into it, just recall maybe when maybe you were in it, you didn't realize it. You were having this heightened emotional experience with a loved one, in a fun event, on a kind of once a lifetime trip kind of thing, and then just mirror that in what you want to apply now.
Most of us, we tend to remember our flow states.
Mm-hmm.
Flow. We talked about the huge spike in learning and memory. It comes down to neurochemistry. So neurochemicals are multi-tools. They do a bunch of different things in the brain. One of the main things they do, though, is they tag experience, important, save for later. So how does learning and memory work? The more neurochemicals that show up during a given experience, better chance it's going to move from short-term holding to long-term storage. Flow, huge neurochemical dump. 5 of the most potent reward chemicals. And flow appears to be the only time we get all 5 at once. We remember our flow states, right? So if you think back on your positive experiences in your life, unless they're like directly tied to either the fulfillment of a long-term goal or a wedding, a birthday, a historical thing, chances are you were in a flow state. If it's not those first 2 things, chances are if you remember it, you were in a flow state. Because of how that works, and we tend to remember those things. So I have no idea how I started down this train. Oh, I was coming off of what you said, but I'll stop there and let you ask your next question.
It kind of makes me think about your experience in all of this in our country and kind of this park skiing experiment you were conducting on yourself and with other people. I wonder what new states of flow state did you experience, were you able to tap into, knowing what and then kind of pushing yourself now this 5% more, if not even more. Can you recall any unique new or variances of flow state in this new application?
No, but I will tell you it's not new. New is, I don't know about new, but I will tell you one of the things that shocked me a lot from the NAR country experiment. So I said flow states have triggers. Novelty's a flow trigger.
Mm-hmm.
And so exploratory mode on the mountain, right? When you're just like, I'm skiing, I'm park skiing, but I'm going to go someplace new, see something new. That became such a go-to. Like whenever...
like a new trail, new
well,
area
yeah,
of the
and
park,
so like whenever I was overtaxed, right?
Okay.
I pushed too hard and I was too much anxiety and I'm blocking flow that way. Or whenever I got injured, right? Stuff is going to happen along the way. You're trying to learn to park ski. Rather than just sort of giving up, oh, I got injured, I'm going to go home, I would often sort of like chill out a little bit till like the ache is gone and then use novelty as a flow trigger. And so novelty always works as a flow trigger. It's great, but I was so surprised in like acute situations how well it worked. That was what was surprising.
What do you mean by that?
Meaning like my body could feel like absolute hell, right? And even my brain could feel bad. And yet novelty was so powerful that, just being in those fresh environments. So some of this stuff that was learned along the NAR was like about how even the diminished challenge skills sweet spot, right? 1 inch at a time. That doesn't sound particularly powerful. It was unbelievably powerful. That was the weird thing about NAR country is, when I set out to teach myself to park ski, I figured it would take 5 years minimum, right? Like, okay.
So going in, you had that expectation time.
I didn't. Well, going in, most people thought it would never happen at all, and I was going to kill myself. I thought if it happened, it was going to take about 5 years. And to track progress, I made a list. There were 20 tricks that covered 0 to intermediate as a skill set. And when I started,
which have the most gnarly names,
Gnarly
by the way.
names.
I was cracking up reading some of these.
Some of the names.
It's even more funny when you actually describe them, because some of them are so spot on. I'm like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Others, I'm like, how did you get from here
there to there, yeah.
here?
Well,
But
by the way, there's 6 or 7.
I guess that makes me then
there's
a
a
Joey,
whole,
right?
No, well, there's a whole bunch of. I mean, there's a whole bunch of there's a whole bunch of stuff in park skiing where it's got a crazy name and nobody even knows where the name came from. Like thing grabs and you're like, why?
It just
is
started.
That?
Nobody knows where.
No,
why.
there's a Japan grab in skiing. You would think. I still, to this day, I'm like, okay, well, it's obviously one of the
Originated in
Japanese skiers did it first, right? But I have no idea. And we just call it a Japan grab. Like, nobody has a clue. Like, maybe somebody does, right? And there's a bunch of stuff like that where you're like, what is this? Why are we calling this? It's what?
That'll definitely get you out of flow state. Maybe don't think so hard about the names.
Some of the names are just absurd, too, because, skiers,
Yeah, absolutely. Again,
action sport
cracking
athletes
me
in
up.
general are absurd with how they name things.
Did humor play a role with novelty with you? Did humor play a role in
Humor
kind of pushing you?
plays a role for me. So here I'll give you another example about here's a humor. So challenge skill sweet spot we talked about before, right? And if I were to talk about that emotionally, I'd say it sits on the midpoint between boredom, not enough stimulation here, I'm not paying any attention, and anxiety. Whoa, way too much.
Yeah.
Right? And the truth of the matter is, anxiety under the hood is mostly norepinephrine. It's cortisol and a chemical called norepinephrine. Little norepinephrine is great. That's curiosity, that's focus, that's a little bit of excitement. Too much is massively overwhelming. And, really too much is OCD and those kinds of things, and you have real problems. But a lot of people, before a stressful situation, will use humor. Right? Like tell jokes all the time.
Try to break the ice,
right? Try to break
the mood. Yeah.
What are you doing? You are trying to lower anxiety levels. When we laugh, that's dopamine. It's a different neurochemical. Dopamine's actually a flow trigger. Will help us drive towards flow.
Case in point of understanding the biology.
Understanding the biology. So
hack your own biology.
People do this all the time. So any peak performance. The funny thing about doing this is there's nothing else going on. You can't do peak performance without your biology. It doesn't matter whose book on peak performance you read.
Crucial concept,
right? It's always there's the biology is going to be the same. I always tell people if you're top 30% of your field, whatever that field is, you're doing a lot of the stuff that I write about in Art Impossible in our country. Maybe you don't know the language for it. Maybe you don't know that there's a right way to do it,
behind it,
or
kind
the
of thing.
science behind
Yeah,
it,
exactly.
or the order it's supposed to happen. But you're sort of mucking around with this. This is another
It's
example.
already familiar.
People telling jokes before a stressful situation, so when the stressful situation shows up, they can be more in that challenge skill sweet spot. We do this all the time, right? We made it much more of a formal practice. So one of the rules was on the chairlift in between runs, you were never allowed to talk about yourself. You were never allowed to talk about what was going on in the world because in flow,
I think you quite literally said it's a good way to get punched in the face.
oh yeah,
by you.
If you what is it? You
I had to reread
what is it?
that
Oh, you
like
want to
5
die
times.
young, talk business with me on a chairlift off flow? No, I mean, you think it's funny. When I was living in Santa Fe, New Mexico, a bunch of people there. There's a lot of scientists there. Sandia Labs are there. Los Alamos Labs are there. I did some work. Santa Fe Institute is there. I did some work with all three. Not Sandia, but Los Alamos and Santa Fe Institute. But a lot of the scientists found out I had written books with Peter Diamandis, and who started the X Prize and sort of a hero to a lot of them. And people started pitching me on the chairlift. They'd find out a lot of the scientists knew I skied, and they'd find me at this ski area, and I'd get on a chairlift with somebody. They'd be like, "Oh, you're Stephen Kotler. Hey, I got this idea for a company." And I was like, this can't be
Shoot your shot, fam.
This
Shoot your shot.
cannot be happening in my life. And I would have to explain to people, I was like, this is what I do, so I'm not doing that, right? You understand that, so.
And then Steven just jumped off the chairlift.
What's the very best way to get Steven to never help you? Let me think about this, right? But so that one of the reasons is when we're in flow, the prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain that's right behind your forehead, is deactivated. So your ego lives in your prefrontal cortex. One of the easiest ways to get it to reboot is difficult emotional processing. This is why we tell people at work, if you're going from flowy task to flowy task. Don't ever stop and check your social media in between. Right? Terrible for distractions, but terrible because it'll get your emotions and your prefrontal cortex back involved. Talking about yourself, talking about anything in the world that could scare you, anything in the world could scare you is going to raise cortisol levels and norepinephrine levels and could block that challenge skills sweet spot. So those were the rules on the chairlift, but we would also use a lot of humor. And the humor is a flow prime. So this is another, people do this naturally, right? Like they'll try to make each other laugh. You see it a lot. Football players in the huddle, trying to crack each other up. Soldiers right before
anytime
combat.
they say we're out in the field or like, on just like the most miserable experience ever, like you're hating your life, but you just still crack jokes. It's the only way to
to
get
survive.
through it and
yeah,
to
exactly.
tap back in.
Exactly. Yeah.
Amazing.
So couple examples.
It seems to boil down to kind of bring it into a lot of the concepts I talk about on the show. The physical self. Being a former health coach and trainer myself, I'm always fascinated by the physical potential of the body, the human experience, the human potential, and to shift from biology now to the body is biology, but to go more physical. You talked a lot about how it seems to boil down, or I shouldn't say a lot. There's a section in the book where you talk about it seems to boil down to strength and fast twitch muscle response. Both naturally decline with age, but only if we're not actively training them. So my question is, how do we train both of them most effectively, strength and fast twitch?
So it's actually, those are two examples. What the research shows is you want to, there's 5 skills that matter over time. And
beyond strength and fast twitch.
Well, strength, stamina, agility, which is essentially fast twitch, muscle response, balance, and flexibility. And the World Health Organization has very precise, we know exactly how long you should be training them.
Right.
And so once you get to, I think it's 50, they recommend 150 to 300 minutes. This is for peak performance aging. 150 to 300 minutes of moderate to vigorous aerobic exercise a week, 2 strength days, and 3 balance, agility, and flexibility days. Or, and this is the big hack, dynamic motion. So
meaning what?
Dynamic is a word.
Like skiing.
Yeah. Tennis will work, and where you're doing strength, stamina, all those things at once. But here's a bonus.
And having to move in multiple planes all the kind of the time. Yeah.
And here's a bonus. Not only is that a physically improvement, I'll give you 2 examples here, but here's the first one. If you want to preserve cognitive function, what you need is neurogenesis, the birth of new neurons, right? That's how we fight off Alzheimer's and dementia and prevent cognitive decline. Anytime you have dynamic motion, when the brain has to coordinate strength, stamina, and balance and agility, when it's coordinating all those things, it amplifies both angiogenesis and neurogenesis. So angiogenesis is the birth of new blood vessels that support the new neurons. Neurogenesis is the birth of new neurons. So dynamic. So take it back. When they look at longevity and activity, this has been done a lot. Mayo Clinic did a big study. Join a health club. You gain, and you join a health club, I think it's in your 50s, and you work out for the next 20 years, you'll gain an extra 1.5 years.
I'll take it.
If you run, it's about 3.1 years. Swimming is about 3.6. Soccer, you move to like 5 or 6 years.
Really?
Yeah, and we can talk about why in a second. Badminton, 7 years.
What?
Tennis is actually 9 years. And then action sports, skiing, surfing, those things are about 10. So yeah, it's great. It's a lot of it.
Why is that? Why?
So a lot of it is
sports?
So some of it is. So one of the things that really matters as we age is maintaining robust social connections. Matters for peak performance in general. Like you want to perform at the best at any age, you need to maintain robust social connections. Don't need a lot of friends, but you need some people who love you.
We recently just had on Dr. Marcus Schultz, who was leading the current Harvard study on the longest running study of human happiness and resiliency, this 80+ year now study. And that's exactly what you're talking about.
That's the George Valiant was the last guy. Yeah, there's really good data for that.
Data to verify and back up what you're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, like when George Valiant wrapped this study, it was 80 years. Then I think
I think now it's like year 82 or 5.
Yeah.
Or something.
So at 80 years, the moral was, yeah, good genes are nice, but better social connections matter more, right?
Meaningful relationships matter most.
I mean, we know good quality, robust social relationships an extra 7.5 years to your life. So that's phenomenal.
That's important, people.
That's really important. But it's super important. So here's the thing that people don't realize. Any age. You want to perform at your best at any age, social relationships matter. Why is that? Because whenever the brain encounters an issue, could be a threat, could be a challenge. Don't know, right? Your brain wants to run traps. Like, is this a threat? Do I have a problem here? Or is this something, a challenge I'm going to rise towards? One of the things it asks is, do you got backup? Are you solo? Because if you're solo, this is a big ass problem. We got to produce a lot of fear chemicals, and we got to give you lots of energy.
Is my tribe here, or am I
exhausting.
left alone out in the field? Yeah,
exactly. Or if you got people who love you, people that back you up, all that stuff. You can, if you fail, we're gonna pick you up. You know, that sort of stuff. This is a challenge. I'm gonna rise to. This is awesome. Let's do this, right? So at every level, and that challenge skills sweet spot, by the way, is also that this is going to dictate performance.
Okay.
But that challenge skills sweet spot is going to also code for the same things. How big is that challenge? Well, are you solo, or do you got friends around, right? Like that's.
So am I hearing you correctly? The level to which this perceived new threat or challenge could actually be made worse, or made more, or made less just by having a meaningful connection in our life?
Well, we know
Quality
this.
relationships?
So we know this so everybody's tried to work out after getting in a fight with their spouse or their girlfriend, boyfriend, father, mother, right? Like, you know, that sort of thing. And you're suddenly like, oh my God, I'm freaking weak. What the hell happened, right? Like we've all had those kinds of experiences. I mean, sometimes you can push through and you can take all that and use it. But if you just sort of like have that fight and go to the gym, you're like, oh crap, I'm not performing very, very, like there's impacts, right? We know this. We just don't, we think all the impact is visible, and most of the impact is actually invisible. It's not even the stuff you're thinking about. But it plays a huge, huge role. Over time becomes even more important because part of staving off cognitive decline, you got to keep the brain sharp. Other people help us keep the brain sharp. So that's a really interesting one. But I'll give you, here's a mind-blowing one that I love talking to people who came out of the physical space about, because you'll dig this. So I'll start well, you may know this because you've read the book, but the single most important correlate for peak performance aging?
Tell them.
Strong legs. Thigh muscle mass inversely correlates with mortality.
Because of the necessary bone density that correlates with it.
Yeah, so most people don't even know that. There's 3 reasons.
Yeah.
One is the bone density, right? Because cognitive decline, our bones are the mineral factory for the body, including the brain. And if you think about the brain runs on sodium, potassium, and calcium. Where do you think that calcium comes from?
Your bones, fam.
Right? And which are the biggest bones in the body? Your leg bone, femurs. So that's 1. 2 is when we lose muscle mass, we become less mobile, and balance and agility goes. So the number 1 killer of older adults, if cancer doesn't get you in heart disease, a fall. Exactly. You're going to fall. You're going to crushed by a secondary infection. And the third thing, we just talked about the importance of social connection. When people's mobility goes, when their legs go, their relationships tend to follow because it's harder to maintain. I mean, we can do a lot.
Like you can't get out and be social. You literally can't walk out.
You literally can't walk around and be social. There's probably other stuff going on there that we don't know, because the correlations are wild. Like cognitive function correlates.
I can share with you a very personal example. Long story short, I suffered career-ending injuries in the military. I had both of my hips reconstructed. Oh wow! My femur on my left side, they actually take out like a 1/4 inch more than my right. And so like my last year and a half, I was a patient in and out of the hospital, bedridden, rehab, kind of all that shit. Everything you're saying is absolutely true. Like, the leg injury, it's so wild now that like there's the science behind it. I just thought it was like, oh yeah, I'm injured, I can't really do much. So of course, like who's gonna want to hang out with me? Also, I can't go anywhere. And so what you're talking about is very, very real, especially for me.
Yeah, I think it's so those 2 things are really cool. And I mean, it's also the thing about it, like you don't want to start dealing with this shit in your 50s and 60s, right? You don't want to have to suddenly like, oh my God, I got to build up my legs straight. Like you want to start young. You want to have that foundation. The other thing, and you know this, so in the challenge skills sweet spot, another thing that impacts what the challenge is self-confidence. Oddly, one of the biggest drivers of confidence is leg strength. People don't realize it, but like you are way more confident when you're grounded and solid upon the Earth's surface.
Literally,
way more confident. Like, and I remember this because I, for years, didn't work legs nearly as much as I worked upper body because of the sport. I was surfing and things like that, and legs would just. I figured I'd hike the dogs.
I'm walking. I'm on
doing
my
it.
feet.
I'm doing it.
Absolutely.
And then there was a point where I was like, let's just actually get serious about this, right? Like this is getting silly. And a year in, when my legs started getting strong, the biggest shift was psychological, right? And this is me. I'm a peak performance expert. Like I've done a lot of this work, and I was like, oh my God, this is profound.
Well, there's a lot of spillover in that. And actually, this is a big reason why I personally, most guys, I think at least, Monday's International Chest Day, you go hit the bench press, hit chest, whatever. I actually prefer to start my week of training with legs. And for a lot of the spillover effect here, when you're training your legs, your lower body, beyond enhancing bone density, it's your largest muscle groups, your glutes, your quads, your hamstrings, your largest muscle groups. So what you're doing there is stimulating right out of the gate the most amount of, triggering HGH as well. So enhance recovery, enhance mental health. I mean, HGH does a lot more than just building muscle and strength. It does have that kind of psychological mental health spillover effect. So quick little hack there as well.
That's true. That's smart, actually.
Also, it's my lifelong kind of like personal rehab as well. So kind of getting to the last couple questions here before my final question, which ones are the most important for me here? Let's talk fear if we could.
Yeah, please. I'm scared of this question. You knew it was coming, right? Sorry.
Let's hack flow state for fear.
Oh, shit.
If we, excuse me, if we get real with what is actually going to take to accomplish what we want at any age, there is inevitably a consistent level of fear on that timeline. Again, pulling from your work here. So how do we accept, my question is, how do we accept what we are going to have to do? No, excuse me. I can't read my own text here. How do we accept that we are going to have to do things that scare us on a regular basis? So we want to get better. We want to tap into that 5%. We want to tap into flow state. We want to maybe embark upon this new endeavor. But I think any smart planner would recognize that, okay, it's going to be scary at least for a little bit, or maybe for a long term, depending on the goal here. How do we really kind of just accept that we're going to have to be cool with fear for a regular basis in order to get where we want? Or how did you?
Yeah, I mean, so that's interesting. That's an interesting question. Let me back in. Let me start with the answer and where I want to go, and then work my way there. And I write about this in The Art of Impossible. I talk about it again in Our Country. Peak performers, the best of the best, use fear as a compass. And the reason is, so in performance across the boards, we have a limited energy budget in the body, right? And the biggest strain on the body's energy is always focus. The brain is 2% of our body weight, uses 25% of our energy, and that's at rest.
That's just when we're sleeping.
That's at rest, right? So
we're doing jack shit, and it's taking up a quarter of our energy.
Taking up a quarter of it, right? So, and most of that energy, by the way, goes to paying attention. So anytime you get focus for free, that's a big deal.
Ooh,
right?
Like
That's
that.
a really big deal. Why are intrinsic motivators, curiosity, passion, purpose, why are they such a big fucking deal? What do they give us? Focus for free. Fear gives us focus for free. When you're scared of something, you don't have to try to pay attention to it. You can't stop paying attention to it. It happens automatically. So POC performers will always use fear as a compass, as a directional. So, and I do this both physical challenges and like I've written 14 books. Every time I write a book, there's a writing challenge in there. It's totally invisible to my audience, but it scares the shit out of me.
Still.
Yeah, still. Every one of my books. In Our Country was, a lot in Our Country was, could I make that much skiing interesting, right? Could it be funny? right? Like I
Yeah.
really wanted to write a really funny book on peak performance also. There was a bunch of stuff, but all of my books have these kind of writing challenges that scare me. And one of the reasons is because I get focus for free. So one, the first thing you need to know is there's a lot of benefits for fear. Fear is your friend. The other thing is this, as everybody knows, everything you really want is on the other side of your fears, right? Like
Say that again for them.
everything you want is on the other side of your fears. It's you got to go straight at the things that scare you most because the person you want to be and everything you want is on the other side of that. And that's just, it's true. I wish it wasn't true. It would make it, but that's
Preaching to the choir.
It's
Absolutely.
just true. Is the first part. The second part is a little bit at a time, right? That's the other thing about like going after fears is like, you chunk the things down and chunk it down and chunk it down and chunk it down. So like you always want to be in that challenge skills sweet spot because we know that flow is peak performance and flow, like you're never going to have a better chance at like doing the thing successfully. And so, well, it's not 100% challenge. It's a 5% challenge that I need, 5% greater than my skill set, right? So you're not looking at anything huge, right? Even when I had to do really scary physical things in the book, most of them I found a way to step up to bit by bit by bit by bit by bit.
You even kind of modeled a lot of things.
A lot of
love kind of reading your journey was you actually didn't jump into a lot of the things. You
No,
actually
the point
modeled
of-
it and
the
built
point of this
samples
book
and
was,
examples.
This book is a recipe book,
Yeah,
is really
yeah.
what it is. So like, let everybody has a day where they wake up and they're feeling under the weather and they're scared and they're tired but they have something they have to accomplish and blah blah. Well, that's my third day on like literally like that's these were the preconditions and this is what I did to achieve flow and peak performance on that day. Like that's one of the reasons the book is written that way. It's
I love
this
the realness
recipe.
in your writing and journaling. Even it seemed like a lot of this was just kind of like recollection writing, but also just like this was Stephen on that day.
Yeah,
Like,
most of
unbarred,
the
unfiltered.
but most of this, literally, like the first draft of almost every one of these chapters was written probably right when I got back from. I would get back from the mountain and I would immediately go to my desk. I would take notes on everything that just happened. Right, I might polish the notes and do everything else the next morning, but like it was, I didn't. Sometimes I was writing things down in the car before, on the way home, so I didn't forget them. I tried to make it as real as possible, and I also I wanted it to have this recipe book quality because one of the reasons I wrote it is coming out of Art Impossible. Actually, the biggest questions my readers had, my fans had, people that we trained at the Flow Research Collective is like, okay, this is all the huge theory. This is how to this, but what's the application look
Right,
like,
yeah.
right? And
What does
they
it all
don't
mean, Basil?
And I was like, well, there's a lot of application in the Art of Impossible. And I was like, what do you mean? The book's filled with application. And I realized that's not what they're talking about. They're talking about literally what I just said is, on days when I wake up and I'm like, I got in a fight with my wife and I didn't sleep very well. And my boss blew up the project that I'm working on, and how I put it back together is going to determine my success over the next 6 months. What the fuck do I do here? Well, you can find a very similar, chapter 67 is is that it, right? Like that. I wrote this in a sense for
it's real world.
yeah, exactly. For all the people that we train, so all the coaches who work for the Flow Research Collective, when they get asked those kinds of questions, they can be like, well, Stephen dealt with something like that in chapter whatever, and they have real world examples that they can just point to because there's I don't know how 100 different chapters in this.
There were a few. Yeah. Actually, that kind of brings up another interesting point that I think is so specific to the decade that we're in.
Okay.
30s, 40s, 50s. With that, not only comes wisdom and experience and biology, but it also comes with every version of ourselves. It comes with every memory, every trauma. Was there ever a moment where maybe you were faced with this new endeavor that was not a matter of I need to tap into a unique state of focus or I need to understand my biology, but this is actually like I'm coming to the top of this mountain with some shit 20 years ago. Was there ever like a
my God.
scary memory, traumatic event that like presented that you then need to uniquely navigate?
Well, so I mean, you asked why park skiing. One of the reasons is I had massively unfinished business because when I started my career, I started out as a journalist. and I chased professional athletes around mountains for a decade. So if you are not a professional athlete and you chase professional athletes around mountains across oceans, what do you think happens? It's terrifying. It's awful. I broke so many bones, but like we were laughing about it recently. A couple days ago, I was with another one of the early journalists who I helped start Freeze magazine, the very first sort of extreme ski magazine. So I've like very familiar with this world. There was no writer on staff at Freeze who did not get PTSD on a story. We all got PTSD covering professional athletes.
It always makes me wonder, like the videographers and cameramen out there watching, filming like documentaries and extreme sports. I'm like, are you also an X Games athlete? Like, how the fuck are you doing that?
Those are my friends. They're astounding. Especially the cameramen, they're skiing the same goddamn things as these pros are. With 50 pounds
and
on
they
their
just
back.
got there, like
right?
they don't have the park experience.
So it was one. I got my ass handed to me for a decade, right? I broke so many bones. I was terrified.
So you kind of wanted to like revisit it like on your own terms.
I had unfinished business, and that was part of it. Was, I think having a mission is really crucial. So in Art and Boswell, I talk about there are 3 tiers of goal setting. Humans perform best when we have mission level goals, high heart goals, which are mission level goals are lifetime goals. I want to be a great writer. High heart goals are the 3 to 5 year goals that we have to accomplish on our way to our mission level goals.
The smaller rocks.
I wrote a book about cooking. I got a degree in writing, or those are the smaller steps. And then clear goals, the day to day, the to do list, right, that feed into our. And humans perform best when all 3 are pointed in the same direction. But it also turns out that when all 3 are actualized in a mission, that's the most potent thing you can do. And ask anybody, like, I started thinking about it because, so as journalists, right? Like I was a journalist, and it didn't matter who I was in my normal life. If you gave me an assignment, I would do anything to get the story. I mean, like I've sailed through monsoons with pirates. I've done stuff where like I shouldn't have lived. I shouldn't have lived at all. And you look back and you're like, I just did it because like they gave me an assignment. Yeah, I was poor and I wanted but like it was just like they gave me a mission. You know what I mean? I was on the mission, and we're all like that. There's nothing unique to me. Most of us are wired that way. So if you can get your goals together into a mission, but the mission has got to have that little extra something. So yes, I wanted to learn to park ski because it would prove that all this new science is right and all the old science was wrong and blah, blah, blah. But the other thing was I had unfinished business with the jocks from my childhood who I got into fights with all through my childhood.
So there's the history I'm talking
about.
There was
that
like the past
history,
memories
right?
coming
And
with
then there was a lot of stuff there. So you asked why park skiing. One of the reasons was because I had so much unfinished business, and you want that. That's extra motivation. That's extra fuel, and
it's free focus, right?
It's free focus, and it's it's a reason. I skied 88 days in that season. And, it is hard. And every time I went to the mountain, I was scaring the shit out of myself, right? Like I was there to do something that scared me. Psychologically, that's like trying to do, trying to do something that difficult. And it was over a, 7-month period. That's a long time to be scared all the time. You need that kind of mission to keep going, or I did.
I love that answer. And I think fear is absolutely one of the free ingredients in the recipe for flow state and success. If we're willing to just, first of all, I think you have to accept that, but then choose to show up to it every day. But also another concept you talked about is creativity, kind of wrapping up, getting towards the end here. Creativity, what role does that have in, growing old and staying rad?
So we talked about those if-then moderators, right? That you need to take care of to unlock these superpowers of aging. So in your 50s, we talked about what you have to do up to your 50s, forgiveness. In your 50s, you actually have to engage in creativity. If you want to unlock all these superpowers, creative activities, it doesn't matter what they are, coding, cooking, writing,
painting,
okay,
just
dancing,
any creative
any creative thing. And I mean, you drive to work on a new route. That's creativity as well, right? So there's lots of big and small, but it's that kind of thinking that actually is what unlocks these cognitive superpowers that become art. So it matters.
Interesting.
Yeah, you can't get it's something about the way that multi-perspectival thinking works. You need sort of creative thinking to sort of train the brain to do all that stuff.
Well, that also kind of ties back into neurogenesis, neuroplasticity, and neural crosstalk. Like, we need to do things to activate the brain in different ways.
Totally.
To keep it talking and like to get different parts
and
talking
keep it
to
fresh.
it. Yeah.
The other reason creativity matters so much here, bonus, it's a flow trigger. So a lot of flow triggers, we mentioned this earlier, work by driving dopamine into our system. That's how they drive focus. And so risk is a flow trigger because it drives dopamine.
Interesting.
Novelty is a flow trigger because it drives dopamine. Complexity, when we sort of gaze up at a night sky and see like an infinite number of stars, and most of those stars are galaxies, and suddenly we're looking at geological time, we get awe, right? That's complexity. That's the front edge of a flow state. That's a flow trigger. Pattern recognition, when we link ideas together in a novel way, that's a creative trigger. And this could be an athlete as a skier. If I look at a terrain feature, a mound of snow, and go, oh, that's perfect for a flat spin 360 or whatever. That's not actually a trick. I made that up. That's two tricks pushed together. Flat spin is
It is now.
It is now.
Yeah.
It's not. That's not actually a real thing. But that's pattern recognition. But it's also when we tell a joke, and that's how the dopamine you get from that's pattern recognition. Or you do a crossword puzzle, get an answer right. That little rush of pleasure you get, that's dopamine. That's
This is why my mom
recognition.
loves
Sudoku.
and Bejeweled and
Exactly.
Words with Friends so much.
It's dopamine, and anything that produces dopamine acts as a flow trigger. So creativity is a flow trigger, and really, really, really useful one, right? You can sort of stack creative decision on top of creative decision on top of creative decision. Is a really smooth entrance way into flow. In fact, we do a lot of work with retiring spec ops folks, that community. We've done a lot of work with that community in particular. As you can kind of imagine, being special forces doesn't matter. You could be a ranger, you could be a SEAL, whatever, beret, Green Beret. It's a very high flow job, right? And when people leave the service, besides the brotherhood, the social connection, all the sense of purpose, all the things
we
you
lose
get,
our mission.
You lose the mission. You also lose all that flow, and the combination. And we're working on this with SOCOM. I'm working on articles on it and papers on it and everything else. So I'm not just speaking out of my butt here. One of the reasons you have such a high suicide rate among, like, if you look at the spec ops communities, when you measure their stress levels on duty, they're actually through the roof. They're way higher than other forces, but they get PTSD much less while active duty. But loss, which is late onset stress syndrome, it's PTSD, but it shows up like 5 years after you left the service.
Interesting.
Is incredibly common, especially with spec ops. And it's because, one, the mission goes away, but two, there's no more flow. So how do you, or we get the same problem with retiring professional action adventure sport athletes,
extreme
or
athletes,
even just straight up athletes. What do we suggest? What's the best? Often one of the best ways, one, you have to double down on, especially with people coming out of the military community, group flow really matters, right? Group flow activities really, really matter because that's what you got. So you have to, that's really important, that closeness, but creativity. So if you can find like group creative activities together, group action adventure sports that are creative, and those are the things that work the absolute best because creativity is close to risk in terms of how it produces dopamine in the brain, and it's a really great substitute. So,
random quick question: do you know Sean Lake? No. Just kind of hear what you're talking about reminds me. So he's, Glenn Doherty. Heard of the Bubs Foundation? He was one of the operators who died in the Benghazi attack.
Sure.
Well, him and Sean are like lifetime friends, best friends. Sean's a former, I think, pro or semi-pro snowboarder. They run an amazing organization called the Glenn Doherty Foundation down out of San Diego area that's all for this, transitioning Spec Ops members back into civilian work through such modalities and experiences that.
Brian, who's sitting off camera over there, right? for years before we stole with the Flow Research Collective, worked with the Army and disabled vets, like people who gotten injured, and used same protocols using
I wonder if
action
you were
sport.
in where I was. I was in this unit called the Warrior Transition Unit, WTU, in Fort Sam Houston in Texas. There's another one in Walter Reed in DC where like all, if you get severely broken, that's where you go, to rehab and or facilitate enhanced transition services. Yeah. Were you guys there? Does WTU ring a bell?
No.
No? Okay.
We have, though I've done a lot of stuff with folks at Walter Reed.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Okay. Well, that's a whole nother conversation. But Stephen, I just got to say, man, your work in everything up to NAR Country has been a huge influence in my life.
And you're just super disappointed in the work because of NAR Country. Right?
But I was going to say,
I'll be better.
I love the variety and the kind of the tempo change in NAR Country.
Thank you.
And I honestly, I didn't know going into it was going to be so. This is just, I'm reading Stephen's like ski journals, but when I kind of changed my approach to it was, okay, this is for you in 10 years, 20 years. This is an opportunity for me as a 37-year-old or anybody listening, a 27-year-old, 17-year-old to tap into experience and wisdom and biology that we can extract and apply here and now, but prepare the future self for. And also real world.
And don't be I wanted to remove, I was younger. I was worried about what was going to happen. You know what I mean? I was more concerned at 55, but that's, for me, those fears set up early, right? And I would have loved, if somebody would have given me this book around age 30, I would have been like, oh, thank God.
Yeah.
Oh, freaking thank God.
We're going to give someone this book. So if you made it this far, we're going to have down in the show notes and video notes. We got a signed copy ready for you. But I got to ask my final question.
Please.
Ever forward, living a life ever forward. When you hear those words, what does that mean to you?
So this may be a lame answer, but
There's no right or wrong answer.
Okay, so because we talked about this a lot, but when I hear it more than anything else, I'm thinking about the challenge skills sweet spot. I'm thinking about making sure that every day you're showing up and you're pushing right outside your comfort zone. I always, to put it differently, I say this in Art Impossible, I demonstrate it in Our Country. Peak performance. Remember, it's getting our biology work for us rather than against us. If you look at it, it's about 6-7 things you want to do every day, maybe 6-7 things you want to do every week. It's not a ton, right? This is really achievable by most people. The trick, as you know, is people always ask me, hey, what are the 3 things I can do Monday morning, right? And my answer is always the same. Fuck you. Fuck you. There is no 3 things you can do Monday. I mean, what are you, freaking kidding me? What are we, 10? First of all, the point is you got to do 3 things Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, repeat. Forever. Yeah, exactly. Forever. Right? So peak performance is a checklist. The good news. The bad news, you got to show up every day for that checklist. That's what you're doing. And most important on that checklist, in my opinion, is the challenge skills sweet spot. You got to show up every day to push yourself. That's your job. Your job isn't to compare yourself to anybody outside you. It's not to goal set by anybody else's standards. You know where that challenge skills sweet spot is. You know exactly how much is pushing yourself right outside your comfort zone. And that's your job on a daily basis. So when I think about Ever Forward, that's what I think about. I think about doing that job. And the point, one of the reasons I wrote this, if I were to sum it up in a phrase, is somebody asked me this the other day, and I was like, I am so tired of meeting people who are dead before they're dead.
Oof.
I am so sick of it. And so sick of meeting people in their 20s and 30s and 40s. Forget people my age. That's a given. But 20, 30, 40 years younger than me. And I'm like, what? Right? I am so tired of that. So that's what I think when I think Ever Forward.
I love that interpretation. It reminds me of this book I was sharing with you that I was reading around the same time as Recapture the Rapture with your guy, Jamie. The Immortality Key, or Immortality Code. I'll figure it out in the post. But it's, if you die before you die, you won't die when you die. And it's this concept of, really they're talking about, ego death and this kind of altered state of consciousness that we can find in a lot of different ways. But I feel like that's kind of like the other side of what you're talking about. That, so many people, I say sleepwalking, but you're dead before you ever die. But if you can figure out how to die before you die, then when you die, you don't die.
That's an ego death thing.
Yeah.
I think we're talking about like a soul death here.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
I don't want.
So I'll have to go back and cut my part out. I digress, but it just kind of sparked that different kind of connection.
There's no such thing as a bad tangent. We
There we
like
go.
all tangents.
Especially not with you. I'm picking up on
Especially
that
would
for
be-
sure.
Especially if we can make a joke out of it. I can be laughing. I'm good.
Well, Stephen, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for coming on the show. You guys definitely want to check out NAR Country, Growing Old and Staying Rad. We're going to have a giveaway ready for you, a signed copy in the show notes, and I'll be talking about it more on social media when this goes live. So thank you, man.
Thank you, Jason.